Hello everyone, it's Katerina Pekova again. I'm Tech Community Manager at STRV, and I would like to welcome you all here at our 9th STRV online event in 2021. It's really great to see such a great show up, and I hope that this talk will go without any major technical issues and that you will all enjoy that. Firstly, I would just like to cover a few basic rules so everything can run smoothly. You have many options how you can interact with the speaker or with other attendees directly, so your experience is as lifelike as possible. So the priority for us would be the option to raise your hand. If you do that, we will call you up, unmute you, and you can ask your question to the speaker directly. Also, you can write down your question into Q&A section. In that case, we will get to your question when it's question time. And the last possibility is to write anything into the chat. You can chat with others or with just the panelists, so always make sure that you address your message to the right person or a group of people. Okay, so now I would just like to run through a quick introduction. We have 3 great guests today, among Lukas, Hermann, a senior Android developer, and our speaker for today. I would like to welcome Václav Tarantík, Android platform lead, who will be the moderator for today, and also Lubos Smith, co-founder and CEO of STRV, who I would like to give a word right now. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Katka, for a great intro and putting this event together. I'd like to welcome everybody to joining our online events, and especially with the pandemic, it was really hard to transition our community vibes into the online world, but seems like we are doing that pretty nicely, and I'm really happy that I'm now able to also join one of the events, and I very much enjoy being in touch with the community, and that's what we are all about at STRV. So it's great to see a lot of attendees here. I hope that you guys will learn a lot of interesting and new stuff about Flutter today, and I'm pretty sure that Lukas has prepared a great insight into what can be achieved with Flutter, and I'm very grateful that we can be putting these events together for the community. Also, I would like to mention that we definitely are really looking forward to throwing offline events as well, and be welcoming you in our offices and having some in-person vibes going on. But having said that, we'll definitely carry on doing these online events as well. Because we realized that this way we can also interact with people that are outside of Prague and also outside of the Czech Republic. And the community is growing, the word is spreading. So we definitely feel that there is an interest, and we would like to continue that effort. And we are very much appreciative of you showing up to our events and raising interest, because for us, being part of the community is extremely important, and sharing and continuous education is definitely part of the core values of STRV. So we definitely want to keep working on that. So that was just a brief intro from my end. Very grateful for all of you being here today, but I know that you did not come for me, but you came for Lukas and Václav, our wonderful members of the Android team. So I'll pass the word now to them so they can kick things off and tell us something about Flutter. But yeah, that's it from my side, and off to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for warm words, Lubo. We're definitely excited to have you all here. I would just like to mention that we're currently looking for a new addition to our wonderful team. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to Katka or to us directly, and we'll be happy to talk to you and have a chat, or at least online, have some beer together and talk about Android and stuff. Now let's go to Lukas and enjoy his wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Lukas Hermann, and I'm going to be your mentor for this Flutter workshop. So let me share my screen and start. First, I would like to talk a little bit about what Flutter actually is. And let's say the Flutter, it's kind of SDK, which using Dart language. It's developed by Google. And its main purpose is to write easily and fast, nice applications multi-platformly for both Android and iOS. And lately, there was a Flutter 2 introduced. And using Flutter 2, you can also deploy the applications for the web and also for the Linux, Mac, and Windows. So you can actually hit with one code, you can hit 6 platforms, which is pretty amazing. So let's talk about the Flutter. Flutter uses Skia at the bottom for the rendering, which is pretty awesome because it's declarative and everything is rendered to the screen pretty instantly, and it has really great performance. And it also introduced some cool features as hot reload, which is pretty fast. And this all enables you to make those apps faster. Let's start with something practice. I hope that everyone had the chance to download the files from the GitHub and was able to run the project as was in the introduction. Otherwise, you can just watch and learn, and you don't have to actually follow us. So in the project, there were 2 folders, strv app implemented and strv app workshop. If you run the implemented folder, you will see the implemented app. And this is actually what are we going to implement today. So we will implement an app that will have some nice icon, that will have some cool name. And when you open it, you will see some nice splash screen. And in the app, we will implement BottomNavigationBar with 3 icons, which you can switch. And on the middle button, you will see some random comics downloaded from the XKCD and displayed. And you will be actually able to zoom the comics, zoom it out, and you will see some name and description. And when you switch the screen, we will download new random comics and display it. So this is the point where we should get at the end of the workshop. So you should be able to implement something like that. And this is our roadmap, which we will follow during the whole workshop. So let's start. Let's start with some introduction to how the code actually looks like, what we have in the project right now, because there are some files already implemented, which you will not have when you start a new project. And let's talk a little bit deeply to what we have in here. So in our project folder, which will be our strv app workshop, we have some folders. There are some native codes, and it's stored for the Android, it's in the Android folder. You will see the default Gradle folder, you will see Gradle files and all the stuff that is native for Android. And there is also the iOS folder for the iOS, which will contain the runner and stuff like that. Then I created a separate folder assets where I'm holding my images, fonts, and stuff like that. I like to keep it here. So we've put there already our icon, which we will use for the splash screen and for the icon. So you can find them there. Then we have the lib folder, which contains the Flutter files. We'll be working mainly here. And then we have some pubspec YAML file, which is something similar to Gradle on Android. You will specify some core things like versions which are used. You also write dependencies here. So there's a list of dependencies we will use in our project. Then there are dev dependencies. Those are dependencies that are only used for building the project, but they are not needed for running it, let's say. So for example, here we will have some libraries which we will use to change the application icon, the application splash screen, or rename our app, because this is really helpful and it makes everything fast. And then there are some configurations for the Flutter. For example, here we define that we will use the material design, and we also specify our assets folders. You can specify a concrete file like image JPEG or something like that, or you can just specify the whole folder which it will use. You actually cannot use asset in your program until you have the assets here, so never forget to specify them here. And there's another configuration we will talk about later. So this is the pubspec YAML file. Now all the things starts in the main Dart file, which is in the lib folder. When we take a look there, there's the roadmap. Let's now talk about how you can run the app. I really suggest using Visual Studio Code, which have pretty nice plugins for the Flutter, and it offers you possibility to, for example, run the app using this run button. And when I hit that, it should launch the application inside my emulator. As you can see, there's only black screen now. So let's quit it. Another possibility to run the app is using the command line, which you can also use. There are some cool Flutter commands you should know. Let's first switch to the workshop directory. So let's cd strv app workshop. And those commands are usually starting with Flutter. First command you should know is Flutter pub-get. This will actually pull and download the dependencies specified in the dependencies in the pubspec YAML file. Actually, you can do it inside the IDE, and it's this button, get packages. When you hit that, it will actually run the same command. Then for running the app, you can hit Flutter run, and this will translate the app and run it in your emulator or device you have connected. If I would have connected more devices than just the emulator, it would ask me here in the console on which I want to build it. I would suggest strongly to run it using the run button in the main Dart, because this way you don't have to do anything when you want to do a hot reload, because when you save the file, it will automatically apply the changes in the app. But if you run it from the terminal, you actually have to press R for a hot reload. As you can see here, there are some Flutter run key commands. So I will not use terminal in this workshop. So I'm going to quit it and run the app using the run button in the main Dart. So we've pretty much finished the first step, building and running an empty app. Yay. Let's take a closer look what we actually have in the project right now. I already created some files and folders here, and I like to structure them as like that. So I have the application directory where I'm holding the application and theme, which we will be talking about later. Then I have some core directory in which I'm holding some core things as networking, which we will also talk about later, and resources. Because the Flutter doesn't have any native or like good resources management, you usually have to do it yourself. So I'm doing it like this, that I'm creating the resource folder and I'm specifying classes, for example, for assets, because you really don't want to access images in the code like that. It's much nicer to access assets using assets.app logo than using this string. So this is a good approach to access images. For colors, I have class color resource, where I'm specifying colors as static constant. I'm then using those colors in the app. When we take a look on the implemented app, I already set those colors here, so you don't have to do that. We have some accent color for the red. We have some dark variant accent color. We can also support dark mode pretty easily. I will show you how in this workshop. And then we have some color gray, red, and background color and navigation bar color, which we will use. Okay, that's for the colors. Then we have some config Dart. I like to keep some configuration things like, for example, API-based URL in here, or you can hold some links and stuff you need. And then dimensions Dart, where I'm holding the dimensions or the sizes, for example, for spacing or corner sizes and stuff like that. So this is example how you can do that. And this is how I'm managing my resources usually. So this is the core folder. And then all the features, all the screens basically in the app, I'm implementing as features and I'm holding them in the folders. For example, here we're gonna have a main screen, which will be holding the bottom navigation and take care of the switching. This is going to be our main. And then we have one screen implemented here, which is the random comics, which is displaying the random comics. Inside those packages, I'm usually making folders like data and presentation. Data is for holding the entities, models, use cases, and stuff like that. And presentation is just for UI. So here I have qubit and pages. We will talk about qubits later. It's for holding states. And the page here is for managing the UI. And then I have separate folder widgets, which are global widgets using across the whole app. And here I created some state empty widgets and state error widgets. We will use those later, but I won't be talking about it as it would talk a little more time. So you just need to know that they are here. So this is about the structure, and let's start doing something interesting. So first, we need to make the app a little bit nicer. We now have some general icon, general text, and when we open the app, it's just some plain white screen. This is really not nice. And the first thing we want to do on our app is to be a little nicer. So to make everything easier, we can actually use some nice, cool libraries that can make it really easier for us. So for example, for renaming the app, we would need to go to the Android folder and to the Gradle file and change that. And on iOS, we would probably need to launch the Xcode and edit somewhere in the iOS folder, but we really don't want to do that. And the same thing applies for the application icons and splash screens. And I really hate managing the native code. So we can use library for that. All we need to do is put the dependencies on those libraries in our dev dependencies. I already put all three there, so we don't need to do that. So we just need to pull our packages, just make sure that we have them up to date. And then we need just to run the command. So let's copy the command. And as you can see, here's a command flutter pub run, package rename, and the parameter app name. You can specify anything you like here. For example, we have a XKCD workshop here right now. And then we have specified the platforms for which we want to change the name. For example, we can set different name for Android and then run it again for the iOS. So every platform can different name. So let's copy that into the terminal. Just make sure that you are in the STRV app workshop folder. And when we run it, everything looks okay. And when we run the app now, the name should be different. It will take just a second. Yep. Now when we close it, we can see XKCD workshop. Cool. So this is the name. And now we take a look how to change the icon and how to change the splash screen. For those two libraries we use there, we need to configure them. And the configuration happens in the pubspec YAML file. And it's here at the bottom. So for the Flutter icons, we will specify which platform we want to change. So we want to change both Android and iOS. And we specify the image path and adaptive icon background and foreground for the Android. So it's all set here. So we can just run the command and the icon should change based on those values. So let's just copy that again, hit run. everything's look okay. And when we run the app, the icon should be different. We will do the same for the splash screen. When we go to the pubspec YAML file, we can see that we already have the splash screen configured here. You can always find examples like this in the pubdev website, where are informations about the dependencies, and it's like a huge list of all libraries for Flutter with versions and stuff like that. So for the native splash, let's take a look that the icon has changed. Yeah, we have a new nice icon. For the splash, you can see that we also specifying color of the splash screen, image it should use. If we want to generate for the web, we don't want to. Also gravity, where it should be centered or not on the Android and iOS. If the splash screen should be full screen. And for iOS, we also need to specify path to info list file. We have, again, everything configured, so we don't have to change anything. So we just need to copy the command and run it again. And when as you can see, you rock. Yeah, I know. Thank you. When we run the app again, you should see a nice splash screen right with XKCD logo. Cool. So as you can see, we've just started, and you can actually change the application name, icon, and splash screen in like 10 or 20 seconds when you have something like that ready. And you can change it to both Android and iOS, and it's really easy and fast. So now we have app ready and we can start working on that. Are there any questions yet, or how are we holding up?
Yes, we have a question here. Why are you using VS Code and not Android Studio?
Yeah, I was trying Android Studio. You can actually use that too, but I found the Visual Studio Code just much faster than IntelliJ IDEA. And also, I somehow found those plugins better suited for me. I don't know, you can use Android Studio, there's no problem in that. Though you can also install those plugins in Android Studio and everything should work fine. But somehow I found the Visual Studio Code more appealing, mainly because it's not taking 20 gigabytes of my RAM and stuff like that. Any more questions?
Nothing yet, but please feel free to ask. We'll give it another 30 seconds.
We can also probably check the setup resources as we went through the resources files already. So as you can see, we have those resources already set it up. And we will continue with the step 6, creating new XKCD app class and setting up the theme. So let's go. So as I said, the main Dart file is the entry point to the app. So you can find here a void main, which is called as the first thing. And here you can do some setup before running your app, which is pretty cool. And the most amazing thing is that when you want to implement some logic on the splash screen, and it would take some time, and you had to somehow solve it before running the app, you can actually do it pretty easily in Flutter, as the main function can be asynchronous, and all you need to do is just write async. And if you're doing something, for example, accessing network or something like that, you can actually use await to wait for it. And the app's going to be launched later on. So you can implement logic on splash screen like that. We won't do it right now, so I'm deleting it. But it's always great to know. There's a question. Or is it?
There's not.
I saw someone raising their hand, so.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's make Sure. I don't think so.
Okay. So as the last part of the main function, we will call the method run app. And I also already created an empty XKCD app here. So let's take a look into it. The XKCD app can be found in the app folder, in the app Dart. And as you can see, everything in the Flutter is a widget. So even the XKCD app is a stateless widget. Every widget has a build method, which is returning widget. And this is what we are doing here right now. We are returning material app. We are using material app here. You could, for example, when you would be implementing app only for iOS, or not only for iOS, you can also implement it for Android, but there would be probably some issues with font licensing. You can use Cupertino app, or I think there is also a library which will enable you to implement like both styles in your app using both material and Cupertino widgets. Because, for example, when you use material app, you can use only material widgets. And when you use Cupertino app, you can use only Cupertino widgets. So we will definitely go the material way. So I'm creating material app here. And as a home page, I'm setting just empty container. This is why when we run the app, hitting run in the main, we see only a black screen. To test that this app is actually run, we can send some color to the container using, let's say, color.colors.red. And when we save the file, the screen changed to the red color. So it's working. Cool. Now, let's extend the material app a little bit and take a look on some things you can do with that. Really cool thing for debugging and monitoring is show performance overlay. When you enable that and set it to true, it will actually show you a graph like that in your app, which when something is rendering, it will show you how much time it took or not. When there is nothing moving on the screen, it's actually holding still. But for example, when I'm saving file, and when you save file, it's going to be rendered again. So you can see it's moving a little bit. So this is a really cool thing to have. You can debug, for example, when you're switching screens or when you're scrolling, you can debug some performance issues with that. So let's disable that for now. And another cool thing is the small batch debug, which is Flutter actually adding to the app. When you want to hide that, you can just set that to false, and it won't be there, for example, when you want to make a screenshot or something like that. So you can specify if the debug banner should be visible or not. And now to the themes. We already have some themes set it up in our app. So let's just copy that. This theme and dark theme. Light theme and dark theme. Let's import that. There's a shortcut. I'm using Alt-Enter for quick fix, or you can probably use, you can use this bulb, and you can import the library, which is app theme dart, and you can import light and dark theme from that. Let's take a closer look on the theming and how it looks like. So you can find the theme in the app theme dart. This file is pretty large and not really nice, but it works, and it works pretty nicely. The implementation I have here and the whole concept I'm holding is that I have a base theme class, and then I have two classes, the light theme and dark theme, which are extending the base theme. In the base theme, I have things I usually need in my app. The main issue usually are fonts and text styles. And the material app actually holding all the styles as classic Android would. So it supports headline 1 to 6, subtitles 1, 2, body text 1, 2, caption, button, overlay. So I have some get default text theme method, which I'm then using in both light and dark theme. And For example, right now, only thing that is different for the light and dark theme on those texts is the primary color of the text. So I'm passing it into the method. Then I have some default text style, undefined text style. I'm using this to realize which style I not have used yet. So for example, when somebody would use in the app headlines 4, I would immediately see that the color is pink and that the style should not be used. And let's take a closer look how the light and dark theme is implemented. It's really easy to support dark theme using Flutter, because all you need to do is return different theme data class and specify different values to those arguments. Let's see what you can use there. Here's, for example, brightness. Brightness will decide if the status bar should be light or dark. Away. So it's pretty nice. Then you can, for example, change accent colors, specify scaffold background colors, which is like the background of the screens, background color, dividers colors, primary colors, and you can specify them for your light theme and here for the dark theme. So the theme is actually set it up now. I did everything for you. So all the color from the color.res files are used here. For example, for the primary color, we are using the navbar color. For the app bar theme, we are creating new app bar theme with, again, some color, some text theme, and stuff like that. So if you would be more into that, you can go through those files and try to take some inspiration from it. As I said, it's a little bit harder, so we won't go deeply into that today. But here is how it's used, and you can take a look into it. So we now have material app with some theme set and some home screen container color red. So let's say we have our material app set it up. You can delete this like this. So we can say that we have some empty basic app set it up. So let's check that. Create main page with bottom navigation and free tabs. This will be our next step to implement something where we can switch those free screens and see how this works. Do we have some questions right now?
We don't, but let's give it some time. Feel free to ask in the chat or in the Q&A or raise your hand.
Yeah. Feel free to ask anything.
All right, we have a question. What about the semicolons? Are these mandatory in Dart? How difficult for you was to learn Dart language?
Yeah, the Dart language actually wasn't too hard to learn. I think it's similar to many other languages like Kotlin, Swift, or something like that. And the semicolons, it's not actually as a huge pain as in many places when you, for example, creating the declarative UA. They are not used much. For example, when we are going to be now implementing the main page, so let's take a look into the main page and I will show how many semicolons there are, but I think it's about maybe 5 in the whole file. So definitely not a problem. Because you usually have a method where you're creating a widget containing another widget, containing another widget. So you basically have a return at the start and a semicolon somewhere at the end. So it's really not a pain, and it's not something I would be hating on Flutter. Some other questions?
Not yet. All right, let's continue. And
okay, let's continue. So we should now implement the main page. I already prepared the folder structure and the file, so you can find it in the feature main pages, main page Dart. And we have some class main page, which is extending again the stateful widget. As a stateful widget, it's not stateless, so it has to have its state. So we have another class, main page state, which is extending the state. What's the difference between the stateless widget and stateful widget? Stateless widget have only the build method, and it's builded, it's rendered on the screen, and it's not holding any state, and it cannot easily redraw itself. But the stateful widget is actually holding its state. For example, here in our state, we can have current tab index, and we can call methods as we have at the bottom here, SetState. And when you change the state of the stateful widget, the widget gets redraw. So the build method is called again. We will see it on an example soon. I will show it how it's done and how it's worked. We will see some changes, and I'll put some logs there so you can see how it works. So we have stateful widget, which has the method create state, and in the create state, we just create new instance of the state. Let's start with using the main page so we can actually see that something's changing. So let's take the main page, and we will need to display it somehow, because right now we have some empty screen here. So we need to go back into the application, so app.dart, and here where we have the home. So we won't be using the container with the red color, but instead of that, we will use the main page, and we will create a new main page. When we save the file, you can see it's immediately switched to the black, because the main page don't show anything. So let's return back into the main page. And in the build method, in the state, we can actually collapse the stateful widget, because we won't be using it. And in the main page state, you can see that we are returning the container. To see that it works, we can again set some color into it. So let's say colors.yellow, for example. And when we save it, you can see it's yellow. So the main page is used in our application, and now it's displaying in our app. So we want to display 3 different screens in our app. How to do that? You actually don't have to navigate between them and writing any navigation. You can do it as simple as creating a list of 3 widgets and switching between them. So let's start with that. We have a list widget here, which will be called navigation tabs widgets. And it's going to be a list which will contain 3 widgets. Right now, we won't use the random mix page. We will do that in the future. So right now, let's create 3 containers in the list, all with different colors. So the first will be red, second is going to be blue, and the third going to be green. So we have a list of 3 widgets containers. Now we will need to know which screen we should pick from the list. For that, we will use this variable current tab index, which we will set to 0 at the beginning. It's going to be normal integer. And by this value, we will know which screen we should display. Now, let's try to implement logic so we can display screen from the list. First thing you need to do on all pages is to return, instead of container, we'll be returning scaffold. The scaffold is taking care of the material design widgets, and it's displaying those materials widget correctly. So let's uncomment the end line. So we have scaffold. And now inside the scaffold, we will use body. And in the body, we will display navigation tabs widgets, which is the list, on the index of current tab index. So it's going to be 0. So the item should be red. When we save the file, you can see it already switched. So hot reload is working just fine. And you can see the changes here. We can remove this, so it's not here. Return scaffold, body. Now we can see that we are missing the bottom navigation, so we cannot switch between the screens. So let's implement the bottom navigation bar right now. The scaffold, as it's a main widget for everything from the material, it has some cool things. When I hit Control space, I can see that I can specify some things like, for example, floating action button. I can just specify floating action button, which will be at the bottom right corner. Or we can specify bottom navigation bar, which we will use right now. Let me uncomment the whole block of the code and go line by line what's happening here. We will also need to add some imports. So let's do that. And also some methods which are here at the bottom. So let's uncomment them too. Okay, everything looks okay. So what do we have here? Bottom navigation bar in the scaffold. And we are putting constraint box into that. I'm using constraint box here because of some size problem on iOS and Android when the system have some bottom bar at the bottom, like the line. I mainly had problem on iOS devices with that. So I'm solving that with wrapping the whole bottom navigation bar inside a widget of constraint box and setting minimum height to it. So this is some fix for iOS stuff. And inside the bottom navigation bar, you actually style the whole widget of the bottom navigation. So for example, we are setting which background color it should have. And here you can see how you can easily take a color from your theme you specified before. So you can access theme using a context, and you have the context inside each build method in each widget. So as you can see, the build method containing the context, and you can use it to access themes and stuff like that. So we are setting background color. We are setting type of the bottom bar, that it should be fixed and those icons shouldn't move. We are setting selected item color, label style, item color. We are setting if the labels should be visible or not when the item is selected or things like that. So it's pretty much customizable and you can do really a lot with just setting some of those values. Then what we need to do is to specify on that. You can write some lambda here, for example, like index like that. So you can write the code actually right here in the initialization, or you can call some method as we are doing here right now. When we take a look into the method on tab selected, which is here at the bottom, you can see that we are setting the state here. This is the thing I was talking about. And this is what we need, because when you click on the button and you would just change the value in the current tab index, nothing would happen, right? We can show it. When I save the file now and I click on other items, nothing will change because we changed the value inside the variable, but we are not telling the widget to redraw and basically build itself again. So that's why the SetState is here. Because when you set the state, the build method's gonna be called again. And when it's gonna be called again, the scaffold's gonna be built again with a new value passed into the body because the current tab index is gonna be changed. So this is how the SetState actually working in the stateful widgets. When you want to change something in the widget, you have to call the SetState to redraw it. Okay, the next thing we have here are the items list. It's easy to add or remove item from the list as just removing the item or adding more than one. So this is pretty nice and easy. And the items accepting a list of anything. And we are putting bottom navigation bar items here, which have some label and some icon and active icon. For that, I have some helper small methods which are returning icon of some size and some color. So as you can see, we have get nav bar color icon, which is returning sized icon. And for the active icon, we are coloring the active icon to a red. So this is how and it's also larger. So it looks pretty nice when you're switching that. The icon got colored and larger, which looks pretty cool. And it's really fast and easy to do. So now, as you can see, we have the bottom navigation set up. It would be also nice to have some cool animations when switching. And you could say that it's going to be hard and it's going to take some time, but not in Flutter. In Flutter, all we need to do is to wrap the navigation tabs widget inside another widget, which is called animated switcher, and just set some duration to it. And now when we save that, we probably need to build the app again. The hot reload sometimes don't work 100%. Usually when you're changing something in the stateful widget. So let's try to hit main dart and run the app again.
In the meantime, maybe there is a question.
Sure.
Why do we need stateless widgets? Why not use a stateful widget with an empty state?
You can always replace stateless widget with stateful widget. It's definitely not going to be a problem, but I think those stateless widgets going to be a little bit faster when rendering and stuff like that. But it wouldn't be a problem to replace all stateless widget with stateful widget with just not changing the state. It would behave the same way.
All right, another one. I see a lot of spaghetti because of the encapsulation. Is it common in Flutter or Dart?
Yeah, there's a lot of spaghetti code, but I don't know how to answer that question. Sorry.
That's fine. Okay, I guess we can continue.
Yeah. So we have the animated switcher here. This animated switcher actually sometimes work a little bad with just switching the background colors, but we take a look at the back when we implement the random page. So you will see that it's actually animating, because right now it's not visible. But the animation is here, don't worry about that. You will see it. So let's get back into the main file, create main page with bottom navigation and 3 tabs. That's done. So we went through the question, so we probably don't have to make a pause here and we can continue. Let's implement the empty random comics page, because we will need another page that we will be showing here. And we'll be implementing the UI and the logic for downloading and displaying the comics here. So again, I prepared everything for you. So when you take a look into the features folder, there's a random comics folder, and you will already find random comics page Dart inside the presentation pages. So let's take a look how it looks right now. And when we scroll to the top, we can see that we have random comics page, which is a stateless widget right now. It's just returning container colors yellow. So we can probably try to use it inside our main page. So let's return there. And inside of the second container, let's use the random comic page here. Let's just uncomment that, import the library. And when we save that, it won't probably work, as we are not, we have this list set before and it's not hot reloading, so we need to run it again. And after that, when we switch to the second screen, we should see a yellow color, which will be inside a random comic page. And it's there. So now we are using this nice widget we have here, and implement empty random comic page. That's done. Use random comics page inside main page. We just did it. So that's also done. Now let's talk a little bit about Bloc library. I went through the way of the Bloc library for managing states, as it's probably most used on Flutter in the community. So it's definitely a good way to go. There are definitely more libraries here, similar to Bloc, or some even based on that, or there are completely different approaches. And the thing is that it's used for handling states and keeping the logic, keeping the state, loading the data and stuff like that, which you then use inside your, for example, pages where you display some stuff based on that. So let's take a closer look and try to implement some empty qubit for our randoms comic page. What is qubit? It's something similar to Bloc, but it's not as heavy as Bloc. It's from the same library. The difference between Bloc and qubit is that the Bloc is also handling events, which we will not need here, and handling events, states, and sending of them. So we will use qubit as it's more lightweight for our use. So inside the random comics feature, we have the qubit folder inside the presentation. And here we have two files, random comics qubit and random comics state. So let's take a look into them. First, we can create empty random comics qubit class. So let's try to uncomment that. And as you can see, the class gonna extend the qubit, but the qubit takes one type, and we need to create that first because it's state holder. So it can, for example, hold just a string, and hold the state it's gonna hold will be just the string, but that wouldn't be suitable for us, and we want to hold much more data, like the state of the screen, if the screen is loading, or it's in the content state, or it's in the error state. So we want to hold that, or we want to hold the comics data, we want to hold the title of the comics, we want to hold the description or the image URL and stuff like that. So the string wouldn't be enough for us. So because of that, we will create class random comics state, in where we will be holding all the values. So we need to do that first. So let's go to the second file, random comics state. And here we will create our class random comics state, which will extend eqtable. Eqtable is a library that offers implementation of equal for you. So based on that, when you extending eqtable, you need to override a list of objects and get props method. And here you will specify a list of values. And based on them, it's going to say if two instances of class are same or not. Why we need that? It's because when you're using Bloc library, you have some state. And when the states is different, you get a callback and you can react to it. But if we wouldn't using the eqtable, the instance of the class would be, for example, same, and you would always need to create a new instance and somehow control if they are same or not. So this basically take care of it for us. Inside the random comics state, we're gonna need to hold some status and some comics data. Let's put those comics data out for now, and let's just use the status. The status for us gonna be some enum specified here at the top, and it's gonna have 4 states: loading, success, empty, and error. So we will be able to react to them in our UI and display it correctly. It's nice to have some extensions. This is something like extension method in Kotlin, and I think there's also extension method in Swift, but I'm not sure. And it's written like that. So you have some extension on something. So here it's going to be extension on random comic status. And we will have methods like is loading, is success, is empty, and is error. So it's much easier for us to use them than just comparing it every time. So it's definitely nice to have extension like that. Now, when we have the state, we can use it inside the status. We can use it inside the state. So we can say that the state is gonna have variable status of the type status, and the eqtable is they're missing something, probably the constructor. So let's uncomment the constructor. The constructor gonna require the status, so it doesn't have to be null, as we are using Flutter 2 now. So there's a nullability already. It wasn't there in the Flutter 1. So Flutter 2 is now handling the nullability, so we need to put the required that, or otherwise we would need to do the status as nullable. But we don't want it to be null ever, so let's write it like that. And then we want this nice little method, which is called copyWidth, which is pretty useful, as when you're changing the state, for example, you are loading data and you finish loading data, you just want to switch from the loading to status, but you can have, for example, 5 or 6 fields here, and you just want to change one. So for that, you can use something like that, like method copyWidth, which will create a new instance of the class, and it's gonna copy all the values from the old class until you specify them and change them. So we definitely use that, and it's really great. And why it's, yeah, we've been missing import, so let's import that. So now we have some random comic state, which is gonna hold random comic status on which we can react in our UI. So let's now try to get back into the qubit where we'll be using our state. It's not right now. Also, there is small change to the importing. As you can see, I'm not importing the state, but I'm using it as a part of the file. You can actually link two files using the part and part of. So it behaves like it would be a one file. So just, you know. And we are missing constructor here. So let's uncomment that. Let's comment the fetch data method for now, as we are not have it implemented yet. So we have just a constructor, which is calling the super, which is creating random comic state. And we need to implement, like we need to set the status as it cannot be null. So at the beginning, we set the status to loading. And that's all we need to do. No errors, no problems. Cool. So I think we can say that we have empty qubit structure implemented.
And there was a question.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't using hot restart enough to reload the state?
I'm not sure now what's the difference between hot reload and hot restart. So I'm not sure. But the build method should be called on hot reload. So when you save the file and the hot reload is called, the build method inside the stateful widget should be called again.
Okay, I hope it answers the question.
I hope so.
And another one, are there any real differences between import and setting files as being part of each other?
I don't know. I don't know. This is how it's usually used when you take a look on some snippets on the internet. I'm not sure why exactly the state and qubits is connected by part and part of, but why it's not just imported. Maybe because you can, for example, access some private things inside the file. I'm not sure. I don't know. Any more questions?
Nope. I guess we can continue.
Okay, so we have created some empty qubit and state. And now let's take a look how to use them in the UI and how to prepare a state handling so we can show loading and stuff like that. So for that, we will need to go back into our random comics page, which is here. And first, let's start with switching it. I'm not sure why it was stateful widget here. It probably didn't have to be a stateful widget, as we are not calling a set state here, I think. Yeah. So, okay, this is a little bit messy in my workshop. Sorry for that. We are making the random comics page here as a stateful widget, but it actually could be a stateless widget. If we have time at the end, we can probably try to change that, but for now, so everything is working fine. Let's use the stateful widget here. So let's uncomment that. Let's uncomment the first and last bracket of the file. Okay, and let's uncomment the build method. So we have the raw structure ready. Let's try to return container here. So everything is cool. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, the random page changed to the gray color because we are using the random comics page here now instead of the container, which we had here with the yellow color. So let's try to delete that. Again, we have some stateful widget, we have some state here, and we have a build method here. We can probably change it now. So let's try that. Let's try to experiment a little bit. Let's try to rename the random comics page state to just random comics page. And instead of the state here, let's try to put the stateful widget. And here we need to create one missing override. It should look like that. Oh, not stateful, but stateless. Oh my gosh. Like that, okay. And it should work the same way, so it should be fine. Badly prepared code, sorry for that. So we have some random comics page, and here inside the page, we will again return a scaffold to implement some Android things. For example, the scaffold have support for the app bar. So here in the scaffold, we can create app bar at the top, and we can specify, for example, title to a tab bar. And for the title, we can put anything we like here. So right now, I'm putting here a text, but you can put their image, button, anything you want. So we'll be putting text with random text comic here and some style of headline 6, which we again taking from the theme of context.text theme.headline. Now let's specify some body, for example, some container, just empty container, so it's working. And we need to close the bracket hell. This one, yeah, this one. So we just uncomment the bracket hell. And as you can see, we have now scaffold with the app bar and with some title at the top. Now to the using of the qubit. For using a qubit, we will need, before using the block builder, which is like a widget which will build based on some qubit and some state, calling a builder method and building some widgets based on that state. So if you want to use block builder, it needs to be nested inside a block provider. So you have to like provide the qubit first before using it somewhere in some builder. So inside the body, let's say we have a block provider, which will have a create, where we will be creating our random comics qubit. Let's import it again. Also, let's import the block provider like that. And as its child of the block provider, of the widget of block provider, there's going to be another widget, which is going to be the block builder. And this block builder will now, no imports. We'll have the random comics qubit, and it's going to be handling the random comics state, which is the state of the qubit we specified in the qubit. And can bracket this one, bracket this one. I'm starting to be lost in them. And the block builder need to have the builder method. And now it's going to be a little bit red. And the builder method is passing context and state to its body. And inside that body, we need to return some widget. So right now we can write return container somewhere at the end. Now it's not right because we've started to returning something. So he's happy. And how it's working is that this method is going to be changed every time our state changes. So when we'll be inside our qubit, and here in the qubit we call emit and set the state with some different values, and those values are going to be different. Our builder method is going to be called, and we can build different UI, different things on the screen here inside this builder method. So we will use this for handling the state and for displaying the correct loading, success, empty, and error states. So let's uncomment the whole code. And as you can see, all we do here is we are implementing switch, and based on the state status, which when you click on it, you can see that it's the status inside the random comic state. Based on that value, we have some cases here for loading. We are returning centered widget of circular progress indicator. So it's like the loading spinner. For the success, we are now returning just a container with yellow color. So the background should be yellow. And for the empty we are using, and for the error, we are using those widgets I've been talking about here that I have implemented them there, but we won't go deeply into the UI. It's just widget that is displaying some text and a button. That's all you need to do. So we just need to import them. So let's hit import. And here is a callback. When we take a look inside the widget, we will see that in the constructor, it's accepting on reload price, which is a function. So there's going to be displayed a reload button on empty and error state. And when you hit that, this method is going to be called. Well, we don't have that method implemented yet. As you can see, we are calling context read to access the random comics qubit. And when you call that, you can then call methods from the qubit. So we would like to call a refresh data method when you hit the reload button, but we don't have the refresh data method yet. We will implement it in a second. So this way, based on the status, we will display loading, success, empty, or error state. Let's implement the refresh data method, at least empty, so it's not calling error here. So let's hit that. You can find the method inside the random comics qubit file. It's there at the bottom. It's called refresh data. There is a Fimber. Fimber is funny library. It's something similar to Timber on Android, and it's just printing logs into your debug console. So we will use this to print some strings into our debug console here. When we save the file and switch to different screen, looks like nothing happened, and we have some errors here. Okay. State empty widget. Yeah, because we've implemented a new state and new widget and new qubit, the hot reload won't work, so we have to hit the run again. Oh, it actually it started working just as I hit the run button. Okay, never mind. Yep, and we can see the loading here. Why we can see a loading? Because we set the loading status inside our qubit when we're creating it. We can, for example, now test the empty state just by setting the state to empty and switching to different screen. And you can see there is an empty state. It's not really centered, some error in here. And we set error and switch the screen. You can see error state. So it's working pretty fine. And when we have to set the content state. Success. Okay, success. We'll see the all. So let's set it to a loading at the beginning to see the progress. That's loading. And let's take a look at our roadmap if we are up to date or not. Use random comics qubit in a random commit page and prepaid started handling. Yes, we did that. We did that. To get the data, prepare comics DTO and model entity. Yeah, so to download the comics from the network, we will definitely need some entities and data transfer objects to get them. So let's take a closer look to that. Do we have some questions?
Yes, there is one question. Is there a way how to avoid the bracket hell? Like if we need to make some really specific widget with certain styling. I myself went as deep as 19 indents to make use of Flexbox.
Yeah, there's a way to get rid of it, but it depends if you really want to do that or not. I would say the best way to get rid of the bracket hell is just get used to it. Definitely what really helps is like bracket pair colorizer add-on, which will colorize the bracket for you. This is really cool. And also really good code formatting. You can use probably, I think, Beautify for that. And set formatting so you always know how deep you are in the structure. But if you really want to get rid of it, you can always like export new widgets and create your own widgets so you don't have it so deeply nested. Or you can call a method which will return the widget for you. And this way you can flatten it a little bit. We can take a look, for example, here on the app bar and the text. For example, I don't want to nest it like that. So I just hit the quick fix here. And actually I have add-on in the Visual Studio Code, which is Flutter, awesome Flutter snippets. I think it's this one. I'm not sure. But what it do is like you can click any widgets and hit, for example, extract method or extract widget. If I hit the extract widget, it's going to need a name and it will just create new instance of new widget and create a new widget from what I've selected. So here it created new stateless widget, and the stateless widget is building the app bar and the text. So you can basically use this to flatten your architecture, or you can, when you don't want to create a new class and passing arguments to it, you can, for example, extract just the method, which will create it as a method, passing context into it and extracting into the method. So this is like one of the ways how to get rid of the bracket hell, I would say.
I believe, sorry to jump in, but I believe that I read somewhere that the creating stateless widget to divide the logic is preferred way, right? Before, like, instead of creating the methods that would return the widget.
Definitely as when you export it as a widget, you can use it on more places. And also because of the performance, I think there are definitely some logic when the widget is not changed, it's somehow reused or something like that. So it's definitely always better to export it as a widget and not as a method. Okay, do we have any more questions?
That's it for now. I think we can continue.
Okay, so let's try to take a look at the data. Again, I prepared everything for you, so you don't have to do anything. Here in the random comics, we have the data directory, and inside of that we have entities, models, and use cases. Right now we will take a look at the model and DTO. So first, let's take a look to a DTO. Let's uncomment the whole file and take a look what's happening here. So we have some class comics DTO here. And this is the structure which is going to be returned from the API. So what we will need in our app is definitely a title, the description, and the URL of the image we want to display. And also we can have some ID. For that, we will create some variables. We have a constructor to fill them. And then we have two helper methods. First is from JSON, because when we call the API, our provider gonna return us a map of string dynamic, and we will need to parse the JSON to our variables. So it's done here. As you can see, to ID, we just put JSON num, to title, JSON save title, description is alt, and URL is image. This way, we can parse the JSON written from our network provider, which we'll take a look later. And here we have toDomain method, which will return our domain comics, which we will then use inside our app. This is implemented in the second file, and all it do, it just maps those values the same way. It's pretty much redundant right now, you could say, but I like to do it this way, as you have divided the entity you show inside your UI and use in your app from the entity which is used to parse the data from the network. It's always a good thing to do. So here in the comics Dart, when you uncomment it, you have just the comics class holding the title, description, URL, and ID. And in the DTO, we have the method to create the comics class from the JSON. So this is for the data. And now let's take a closer look to our API provider and how it's work. Again, I implemented it already. You can find it in the core directory, in the network directory. It's API provider Dart. The usage here in the app is not excellent. You would definitely want to use some kind of dependency injection, but we sadly don't have time for that today, to provide the client in your app and not create a new instance every time. So right now we have some class API provider, which is holding the HTTP client with interceptors. And I also implemented some example interceptors in the app, which are pretty much used in every application. You definitely want to have them in your app. First is header interceptor. You usually have to change the header somehow in your request. And login interceptor, because you always want to know what is sent across the network. So when we take a look inside the interceptors folder, you can see the header interceptor. Right now, in this implementation, I'm only changing the data headers to send the content type header application JSON in the request. You can see there are two methods, intercept response and intercept request, when you're implementing interceptor contract. And in the logging interceptor, just a quick look, we have some Fimbro log, and all we do here is logging using the Fimbro, the request data and the response data inside our debug console. So when we will send the request, we will see some nice details here in our debug console, thanks to that. So this is for our network. It's pretty simple. So let's check that. And now let's try take a look on implementing a use case for fetching the comics by ID. I'm using something similar to use case architecture. When we uncomment it and take a look how it's work, basically I'm doing for each request you're doing on network, I'm creating a separate class. For example, here it's going to be get comics use case. And this class should always have only one method, execute. In this case, the execute method is accepting the comics ID, and it's returning future with the comics entity. This method is asynchronous. And as you can see, all we do here is that we are creating response. This response is awaiting. Here you would like to do the dependency injection in best cases, but we are not doing it here. So we are just creating a new instance of the API provider. We are taking client from that, and we are calling get method on the URI, which is going to use HTTPS with this base URL we specified in the config file, which is the XKCD.com, I think. Yeah, XKCD.com. It's in our resource folder. And on this path, which is the ID we've passed into the execute method info.0. This is just how the endpoint is called. And this will return some response for us. Then we all need to do is just to check the status code. If it's 200, we are happy. And we will return comics DTO from JSON. Here we will decode the JSON response body. And then when we have the comics DTO, we call toDomain, which will return the comics entity for us. And this is like all you need to do to call the API, get the data, parse the data, decode the JSON, and convert it to domain. So basically, when you call this execute method, which is asynchronous, and you await it, you will get back comics or exception, one of those two. So this is the implementation of the use case. Do we have any questions now?
Yes, there is a question. Is it possible to have a stateful widget inside a stateless widget?
Definitely. You can combine them in any way. You can have stateless in stateful, in stateful, in stateless. It really doesn't matter. It's okay. You can combine them anyhow. Because like everything is a widget. So basically, when you create a stateful widget and you use, for example, icon or container or text inside of it, you actually using stateless widget inside a stateful widget already. So yes.
That's it for now.
Okay. So we have two last tasks before us. We need to implement the fetch data and a refresh logic inside our qubit. And as the last part, we need to display it to a user, the data we've loaded from the network. So let's take a look closer to it. So let's open the random qubit again, which is here. And let's implement the fetch data method. Let's just uncomment it and let's take a look what's here. Yeah, we also, first at the beginning of the method, we need to set the state to a loading state. So we know the data is loading. We can change the state of the qubit by calling method emit. But by calling emit and setting a new state to it, you changing the state of the qubit. Because we don't want to create a new random comic state always, like using constructor and specifying all the parameters. For that, we created the copyWidth method. So we just can take the current state we have right now, call the copyWidth, and just change what we want to change. So for example, here we just want to switch from anything what is displayed to the user right now. We just want to switch to a loading state at the beginning of calling fetch data. So we will do that here. Then we call try catch block. And inside of that, we will need to get a random comic from the internet. To get random comics, we will need a random number. So to create a random number, we will use random from the math library. So let's import that, .math. We will create new random.secure. Here's a keyword new. You actually can use that, but you don't have to use that. So you can delete it. It's quite redundant in the Dart. So it depends. And to know how many comics is there, I took a look. There's something over 2,400 of comics. So let's say the most recent comics ID right now is 2,400. So let's specify that as a constant. And now we need to generate the random comics ID. So we call random next integer of the max -1 + 1, because the random is going to generate numbers from 0. But actually, I realized the hard way that the comics on the XKCD is starting from 1. So we need to put the +1 here. And now we can get the comics from the network. To do that, we will await our use case we've created. So let's import that. And we will call the execute method. And as a parameter of what comics we want to fetch, we will pass the random comics ID we've generated. After the await, one thing could be that it's going to throw an exception. We will catch here. We will print it using Fimber into our log that the exception happened. and emit a new state. And this time we're gonna emit an error state. If everything was okay and the comics was returned to us, we will emit new state with the status success. And we would like to set comics here. You can see that we don't have it here right now, so we need to add the comics into our state class. So let's go there right now. And we didn't uncomment it at the first when we was there, so let's uncomment it now. So we won't have only status here, but we also have comics here. So let's implement that. We also need to pass it into the constructor, but this time it's not going to be required as it can be now. Don't forget, never forget to put it inside of the executable into the props, because if you wouldn't do that, the state wouldn't be updated. Like when the comics would be returned, the state wouldn't be updated. Actually, it would work. It would work in our case because we also changing the status. But if you wouldn't be changing the status and you would be changing just the comics, the change wouldn't be triggered. So if you want to the change to be triggered, never forget to put it in here. And we also want to include the comics inside our copyWidth method. So let's uncomment that too. When we save the file now and close it, we will get back to our qubit. We can see that it's not right now, that the comics can be set to comics. And all we need to do now is call the fetch data when the qubit is created. So let's uncomment that. And also we can now call the fetch data when we hit the refresh button. So let's uncomment that too. And let's save the file. We can now close it. We can close the comics. We can close pretty much all the files we have here opened over the time. Use case, save. Make sure you have all the files saved. And we can check that out and try running our app. Do we have some questions in the meanwhile?
Not yet.
Okay. And now when we switch to the second screen, you can already see in the debug console and on the screen then there was some progress. And after the request was sent and response was received, the state switched into the yellow screen, which is our content screen right now. So all we need to do now, we probably have the data as it switched to the content state. And all we need to do is to show those data to a user. Here you can see in the log that the logging interceptor is working. You can see that we called the get method on XKCD 601 info JSON blah blah blah. And we got some response in here. So to show it to the user, we need to implement the UI for that. So let's get back into the random comics page. And here in the success state, we was displaying only the yellow color. And instead of that, we want to display something else. As we don't want the bracket hell, as someone was asking, we will create a random comics content widget. So we won't implement the whole UI here. That would be a real mess. So let's create a new widget, random comics content widget for the content. And let's pass some values we will need in that widget to display it. We will definitely need title, description, and URL of the image. So we will pass that as arguments. And down at the bottom here, we have the class. So let's uncomment this. And we can probably uncomment the whole UI and just go through it, as it would be really hard and mess to uncomment it line after line. So let's just uncomment it. We can save it. Here's color resource, import all libraries. And when we save the file, you can see everything is working. We have the title, subtitle, description. We have the image, which can be resized and moved. And everything's working like a charm. So let's take a closer look how this UI is actually implemented. Here we have stateless widget, as we don't have to switch state, we don't have any buttons, and we don't have to react to anything. So we have classic stateless widget. We are passing into the constructor those three values, the title, description, and image. So we are storing them here in our variables. You can like create variable final string title and then set value to it in the constructor using this title. And then we have classic build method, in which now we are returning a column, because we want, like, all the widgets here are one above another. So we will use column widget for that. And the column widget is accepting children's list. So for example, for us, this is going to be the first children, this is going to be the second children, and the image is going to be the third children. So when we collapse the views, we can see, yeah, we have three childs inside the column. So the first child is going to be pretty easy. It's going to be a container, which going to have a text child. Because we don't want it to look like that, we need to set a padding to that. Actually, each container can have its own padding, or otherwise you could do it the way that you can wrap a widget inside a padding widget and set padding to the padding widget instead. But here we also want to set width of double infinity. So the widget is taking the width of the whole screen. Because of the column, you can see what will happen if I delete it. The view is going to be centered as the column is centering the widgets by default. But when you set the width of the widget to a whole screen, it's going to be aligned to the left, as you can see. Working with the widgets it takes some time to get used to it and to understand it, how exactly it works. So this is a little bit hard for some of you, I guess. So here we have the title with the padding, with the child text. The text has some title. It has some max lines, so it won't take the whole screen. Let's limit it to maximum of 2 lines right now. And as a style, let's set again theme of context, text theme headline 1. And we can actually use the copy with method also with, for example, themes and stuff like that. So the text style natively from Flutter is already supporting copy with method. So you can copy, for example, headline style and just change color of it. So here we are using headlines with the red text color, with the accent color, which is pretty cool and easy to use. Let's take a look on the second one. It's going to be pretty much similar. Again, we have some padding here with the edge insets. We have width of infinity. We have text with maximum line of 10. And here we are extending, we are using style of headline 6 with white text color. Now, the more interesting part, we are using expanded widget here. And we are using expanded so the image takes like the whole rest of the screen. The screen is not scrollable as we have no scroll container here. So we are just taking the rest of the screen using the expanded widget. And inside the expanded widget, we have a container with a black background. So it looks nicer, because without that, it would look pretty plain. I'm not sure why it's not working right now. Huh. Maybe the photo view is taking the height of the widget even without that. Or it's not refreshing, I don't know. And inside of the container with the black background, we have the photo view, which is from a library. If you wonder which is one, it's here in the pubspec file. It's some image handling photo view library. And this library just accepts image provider, which for us gonna be a network image. and the network image is accepting URL. So to display this image, which is resizable, you just need a photo view library and set a network image to that. And that's it. Also, one more thing I would like to show you is, for example, right now we don't have any PullToRefresh. So when we switch from one screen to another and back, you can see that the data is loaded again and the request is called again. This is because we are providing the qubit here in the randoms commit page here. So every time the build method is called, the new random commits qubit is created. If you would like to switch the screen and keep the same content here, you would need to keep this random qubit somewhere else. We can, for just for the testing, of course, create something like global variable. Let's call it final test and create the qubit here, and then just provide the test into the block provider. And instead of creating always a new instance of the qubit, we will use always the same instance. And now, when we are going to switch between the screens, you can see that still the same qubit with the same data is used all the time, and it's not changing anymore. So this is one small thing to a block provider and how the creation of the qubit works. So this is probably the last point of our workshop, and I would be really happy to answer any questions you have, and I would be really happy for any open discussions if you have any. Hit me with anything you want.
Okay. Let's start with the questions. Are there many Flutter projects in STRV, or is it just starting to get traction and new projects are on the horizon?
The Flutter is not actually new. It's here with us for over 4 years now. But from our perspective as a large company, it's hard to tell a client that we will do a project for them in Flutter, because Flutter doesn't have a huge programmer base and huge stability as a native development. So currently we don't have any Flutter projects, but we would like to have at least one in the future, because we started experimenting with Flutter and we really like that. So we would like to definitely want some client project in Flutter in the future, near future.
Yeah, I would just add that we try to use technologies like this one on internal projects or wherever possible, so our engineers can test it and try it for themselves. And then if it makes sense for us, we can definitely try to sell it to clients somehow, if possible. All right, another question: how difficult it is for Android engineer to build an iOS app?
And build an iOS app. Okay, that's a tricky question. As I'm not an Mac user and I have not many experiences with iOS and Mac, it was pretty huge pain for me at the beginning, because to build an iOS app, you definitely need a MacBook and Xcode Studio. You cannot just build it from the terminal as you would do on Android. You need to have access to a MacBook, and also when you want to build it to something else than emulator, you need also the provisioning profile and everything that goes with the native iOS development. So it definitely took me a lot of time to get used to it and work with it. So it's definitely harder for Android user to implement iOS app than for iOS user to implement Android app, I would say.
All right, I believe there was another question in chat. Okay. Is there a way to preview widgets without running?
I think yes, but I didn't try that. when I close this emulator, somewhere here in the Visual Studio Code is a Dart Dev Tools, and you should be probably have something like widget inspector here, but this is probably not for preview of the widget. It's more like for analyzing of the widget in the emulator, but I don't have any experience with that, so it's hard to tell. But as the whole world is so fast and so easy to use, as you could see when I was developing, I don't see any point for having any overview of the widget without running it.
Yeah, I believe that Honza Čepelák is answering the question by saying that you can check it in browser. I think there might have been a possibility when you clicked on Dart Dev Tools to open it in the browser, maybe as well.
Okay.
There, if that's the case. Thanks, Honza, for pointing that out. All right. I believe that's it, if I'm not mistaken, or my chat isn't broken. Oh, there are some more one in QA. Okay, sorry guys. What's your opinion on current state of state management packages? Like there is provider, riverpath, Bloc, Redux, and a lot more. What's your go-to package?
I experimented only with provider, I think, but somehow I got used to the qubit and I didn't have a reason to change that. And I don't have so much experience with those other libraries, so it's hard to tell, but I can definitely say that there's a lot of them, much more than I would like to see, I guess. And it's really hard to pick one of them to use. So this is probably my view on it.
Yeah, and I believe this also answers the question in chat. If you can talk a little bit more about Bloc. So you probably didn't try it, right?
I can talk a little bit more about Bloc, but I'm not sure what to tell about how to go into the details, or what should I tell about it. It's just state management architecture. It can hold a state for you. It has some pros and cons. It's hard to tell what are those, as I cannot compare it to other architectures. So I can't tell.
All right. I believe that the question from Val was already answered. Is it possible to have a stateful widget inside a stateless widget? I believe that Lukas said that it's possible,
Yep.
and it's possible to combine them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Another question, how this page will look like on the web. Are there any CSS styles?
I was trying to compile it to web once, and it looked pretty much completely the same. Like when you open the app, you of course don't have any splash screen or icons or stuff like that, but you just get the window size like that, and everything looks completely identically. There was because I was developing a mobile app which was a little bit larger, and then I wanted to run it on the web just because I was curious. And there were, of course, some things that I had to change. For example, there were some problems with Firebase messaging and notifications. So I had to do some small changes into that. Also, I was using, how it was called, Hive or something like that, not Hive. A library for using MySQL database and storing data locally. And this also couldn't be used for a web, so I had to remove it when the app was launched for a web. And there were some small issues, some limitations of the web. But if you would be targeting from the beginning, I think there would be no problem, and it would look completely the same as the mobile app. That's it.
And another question from YouTube. Is Flutter more CPU and memory expensive compared to native development?
I would say definitely not. Maybe completely the opposite. as the Skia engine is really fast and works pretty well. Also, for example, interesting are animations. When you're animating something, you just redrawing the widget again and again, and this is how you animate things. So the engine is really fast and don't have any performance issues. At least I didn't encounter any. Do you have more questions?
That's it for now, but feel free to ask more questions. We're here for you, definitely.
Sure.
So don't be shy. All right, I believe that's it then. Thank you, everybody, for participating. It was very pleasant to have you here. I think Lukas enjoyed it as well. I hope you all enjoyed it as I did. And we really hope to see you again soon on some of our workshops. We're currently preparing some more from you. And I'll pass the word to Katka.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that it was really nice, and I'm really happy to see so many questions. So I hope that you all enjoyed it, and thank you, Lukas and Václav, for a great event. And for the others, the next STRE event we are planning right now is Frontend Talk on 20th of May. So it's in 2 weeks. So if you don't want to miss anything, just check out our Eventbrite page or the event section on our website. And since we want to be proud of everything we are doing, we would really appreciate your feedback. You should be able to see it once you close your Zoom window, or I will just put it into the chat right now, so you can go straight ahead there. And that's all from me, and have a nice evening. And yep, that's it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. One last thing, if you have any ideas on the next topics you would like to hear and see from us, feel free to let Katka or us know directly. And you can add the CV into the attachment of that email. Have a great rest of the day, guys, and thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening. See ya.